All right. Good morning, everyone. We are here to talk about the Branchville TOC walk audit conducted just 2 weeks ago with DesegregateCT and folks from Ridgefield. My name is Pete Harrison. I'm the director of Desegregate Connecticut. Just before we get started, just a kind of a procedural thing. We typically record these, which we are doing now. This will be up on our website and also on YouTube on our channel. So we'll make sure to get this link out. For folks that can't make the workshop, we like to have this as an available tool for folks afterwards. So thank you for participating. If you're here today, we are recording this for folks that can't make it. All right, so we're going to jump right in here. Really excited about the turnout on the walk and the conversation that we joined. So we're going to continue that by basically doing an overview of the walk, talk about some of the projects that are being proposed with the Branchville plan, and what were brought up qualitatively on the walk from residents, both concerns, hopes, fears, and also we'll talk about some next steps that we can do as advocates at the state level and also what residents at the local level can do. So DesegregateCT, just as a quick background, we are a pro-homes coalition of just about 80 different neighborhood and nonprofit groups. The idea of pro-homes is we support land use reform to encourage an abundance of homes at really all levels of the economic spectrum. We think that this is a really key part of economic prosperity, social mobility, and environmental sustainability in Connecticut, both today and in the near future. And we work at all levels of government across our coalition. Let me just jump to that quickly. Whoops. We really take an all of the above approach to this pro-homes agenda. That means building all kinds of homes, both capital A affordable and lowercase affordable, working at all levels of government, local, regional, state, and in some cases the federal level, also working in and with diverse coalitions. Our coalition is really great, wide spectrum of folks across the state and across different issues, but we're also part of other coalitions and involved in other conversations at the local level in particular. We are also a program of the Regional Plan Association. That comes up sometimes. And RPA is a 100-year-old nonprofit think tank in the urban planning space. It's been active in the tri-state area for over 100 years, including 100 years in Connecticut. They advocate for affordable housing, good governance, transportation, and environmental sustainability policy. And typically once a generation put together a regional plan outlining these objectives at the tri-state area, advocating for smart governance and good policy, and increasingly advocating for those at different levels of government. The most recent RPA report came out in 2017. We can provide a link in the notes here, but it outlines a lot of the objectives, really frankly, all of us are working on in Connecticut to make it more accessible and affordable and sustainable. All righty. So the goal for our walk in Branchville was pretty simple. We have been doing these TOC walk audits across the state for just over a year and a half. This is, I think, our 12th or 13th walk. And our intention here is to advocate for this concept of transit-oriented communities, otherwise known as transit-oriented development. We think Connecticut has such a wealth of infrastructure from a transit standpoint, from a proximity standpoint, certainly to New York, but also to parts of Boston, that we think the growth in our state, all of the pro-homes agenda should be centered around our bus and rail infrastructure. So these walks, we've intentionally designed them around communities that are proactively taking steps to plan for transit-oriented communities already. So in the case for Ridgefield, they have, and we're really pleased to have, of course, First Selectman Rudy here and co-hosted the walk and really has for a very long time, as many of you know, been spearheading this particular project. So our goal for this walk was really to highlight this plan, learn more about it, where it is in implementation, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the barriers, what are some of the opportunities for Ridgefield and for the region once this gets going. And as importantly, what steps can residents in Ridgefield take to participate in this process, to move it forward, to support it? And also from our perspective as the Pro-Homes Coalition at the state level, what can we do to advocate for more state resources to help get this up and running? And we've certainly identified a couple of those both challenges and opportunities during this walk, which we'll recap today. Just quick, very 30,000-foot view glance for Ridgefield. This won't be too relevant for residents, but just for folks watching this, Ridgefield at a glance, of course, is sort of on the northern part of Fairfield County. The Branchville station is part of the Danbury branch line of Metro North. Population 25,000 residents. Depending on how you sort of gauge or where you put in the median housing income, it's around 163,000, which is on the north end for Connecticut and for Fairfield County. From our 2021 zoning atlas, which took census data available from 2020, Ridgefield has roughly a 12% BIPOC population, roughly 31% considered housing cost burden, which is a federal designation, meaning a household spends more than 30% of their income towards housing, whether it's a mortgage payment or rent payment. And just a sample in time from a range of different sort of realtors, from realtor.com to Zillow. The average sales range price is anywhere from $800,000 to $1.1 million currently. A rental range for between a 1 and 3 bedroom is roughly $2,700 to $3,300, depending on the source, which we've cited in this presentation. So we know that Ridgefield is a really desirable community, both its proximity to the New York City metropolitan area and just its natural abundance of beauty. And we also know that there is an existing housing burden for folks in town already. So part of what our hope is for the TOC Branchville walk is to highlight this kind of development is going to benefit the community, even existing residents, but also to talk about some of the future growth that we know is coming, certainly in Ridgefield, in the region, and in Connecticut for any number of factors. So that's going to be a little bit of the context for folks as we're going forward. The TOC, the Branchville TOD plan itself, and I'm going to turn it over to Rudy in just a second here, but just at a high level view of the 111 communities in Connecticut that have some type of transit, be it a bus or rail, about 50 of them have done some kind of TOD study or plan. And in some cases, it's at the early stages of just putting together a document exploring ideas. In other cases, it's actually been implemented, zoning's been passed, things are getting built. Ridgefield is kind of right in that sweet spot where the plan has been completed from a public outreach perspective, and it's in these sort of early stages of implementation. There's some stuff that's being funded and constructed, some stuff that still needs to happen. So there are a couple of different concepts that we just kind of outlined from the plan on this presentation, but I do at this point want to turn it over to Rudy just to give some context about the plan, some of the background of it, some of the public outreach, and kind of where things stand before we get into the walk itself.
Okay, thank you, Peter, and welcome everyone who's on this call. Yvonne, nice to see you again. Ridgefield embarked on this, as Peter had mentioned earlier, around 2015. We received a $250,000 grant from OPM for the purpose of studying a transit-oriented development in Branchville. So we've been at this for 8 years, hard to believe. What we also did concurrently, we received an additional $50,000 grant to study how much of the area and where we could build a septic field system that could handle additional square footage. That yielded about 6,000 square feet, not nearly enough to do what the plan calls for. Hence, we began discussions with the town of Reading. They do have a sewer plant. It's a 245,000 gallon a day sewer plant, and they flow about 40,000 gallons. So there's quite a bit of capacity there. Now, I must say that Reading is as well interested in developing the old wire mill property that has some financial constraints on it right now that's preventing any development from taking place. But in discussing this with Reading, both Ridgefield and Reading, from those of us who are involved in the discussions, look at this area as a population center in the years to come. And I say that because we all know that our areas, based on consensus and our own community growths, we continue to grow, and I don't see any stopping unless there's another recession and things slow up with the birth rate, but they'll once again begin as they have in the past. And we need to plan for that future. Whether we like affordability or not, whether we like a new home being built in the empty lot next door to us, et cetera. Is our town changing? Is the character of our neighborhoods changing? Yeah, all of that has happened, especially here in this town over the last, I would say 50 years. But we need to begin recognizing the reality of what is happening in the New York metropolitan area, and that what some people call sprawl and use it almost as a negative in their discussion about housing, it's a reality that we're going to have to deal with. And I would rather be on the positive side of things to build that foundation for the future. And that's what we're looking to do here. We know that with more people come more cars. We are reaching our limit, I think, in what we can do with our highways. However, we can do a lot more with our railroads, our rail stations, and the amount of traffic that are on those tracks right now, and the level of service. So this area in Branchville lends itself extremely well to the building for the future to become a community for people to live, work, and play, and offer that opportunity at all levels of housing, whether it be affordable, whether it be middle income. We're looking now at a possible project that's referred to as a Gen Y, Gen Z, if you will, the people coming out of college. They may not be restricted as affordability, but they would be very low in cost based on the size, the square footage, the size of the apartment. For people who are coming out of college with some debt, can't find a place to live, this would make it more affordable and give them the access via train south all the way to New York, Stamford, Wilton, and then north to Danbury, as well as bus service to those entire areas. And with the development of the Norwalk River Valley Trail, which for those of you who may not know, will be a trail, walking trail, riding trail from Norwalk to Danbury and passes very close to this area. Our WestCog just received a $4.7 million grant to complete the build out, or at least the design and construction plans for this. And it has been making good progress. So when you begin to look at this entire area from the 30,000 square foot level, or 30,000 foot level, I should say, excuse me, you begin to see the benefits associated with the Branchville area. And it's going to take a lot of work. As I said earlier, we're working with Reading to get a sewer allocation out of their Georgetown plant, the 240,000 gallon plant that flows 40,000 gallons a day, very low. It's not a large plant, but the flows are very low. We have received a $200,000 earmark from Congressman Himes' office to actually study the route the sewer line would take. I have to apologize. I'm right here on Main Street. And you're going to hear sirens. So
we can't even hear it, so it's fine.
Oh, okay, good. You can't hear it. But anyway, basically, that's what we're looking at doing. And currently, we had our first meeting with Reading about the sewer earmark and the possibility of connecting Branchville. There is a project in the architectural phase for about 45 units, which would be for the Gen Y, Gen Z, that would be accommodated with a septic system. Personally, I don't feel that's a good future, because septic systems have a finite life of about 30 years, 25 to 30, depending on the soils and the amount of effluent having to be treated. But maybe they could go ahead with the proviso that when the sewer line comes in, they are required to hook into that sewer. But it's an exciting plan. We've had charrettes on this with all of the landowners, and everyone is on board. It's a perfect scenario, and I'm sure there are going to be some people that aren't going to like it or have some issues with it. But for the future, I think it's a good plan and it has a good beginning. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Rudy. And as we kind of walk through, we're going to sort of virtually recreate the walk because a lot of the specifics that Rudy had mentioned and some of the concerns folks have, we kind of went through it at various times that we'll recap and talk a little bit more in detail about them. We also, part of this presentation, which we can send out to folks in attendance, we did pull some demographic projections for what the population of Ridgefield or Fairfield County is going to look like from the CT Data Collaborative. We know that growth overall is happening, but interestingly, there are different demographics that will see more growth. Specifically, school-age children population is declining, is projected to continue to decline. We've lost about 10% of those school-age children across the census from 2010 to 2020. We know that we are aging, and that's going to be the case in Ridgefield as well. A lot of the demographic growth of the population will be aging in place residents that we know are going to need different types of housing stock and different types of local infrastructure. So we agree with Rudy that there's going to be a lot of growth in Ridgefield. We agree that the infrastructure is not ready yet, but if we are smart and proactive and optimistic and hopeful, we can do some really smart things now to really put ourselves in a situation where we can absorb that growth collectively and individually and really benefit from all of that. So moving forward here, this is just a couple of different concepts, but the route for the walk, we started and end at the Branchville train station. We explored a little bit around that area. There is going to be some growth on the eastern bank of the Norwalk River across from the rail line that we talked about, also bordering to Reading. We crossed over Route 7, where there's concurrently some construction on some sidewalk infrastructure as part of the phase 1. I'm sure Rudy will talk about a little bit. We walked sort of northwest on 102, back down around the Playground Road, back down on Park Lane, and then down Route 7 back to the train station. So we had a nice sample of what the at least sort of western edge of this development region looks like, what's there now from an infrastructure standpoint and land use standpoint, and also how that sort of plays into what some of these plan concepts look like. So just roughly going through, and I won't play the videos, or oops, I guess we will. We took a number of steps to get feedback from residents. We work with AARP worksheets that they've developed over the years to talk about pedestrian safety, visibility, all types of on the ground from a foot traffic standpoint, what a particular area looks like. We mostly got sort of a handful of the surveys completed. It was more of a dialogue. So the feedback that we're providing in this workshop is really more anecdotal, qualitative, as opposed to quantitative. But I do think we got a really good sense of some of the specific concerns that came up. So immediately leaving the train station, there is currently a closed street that is being redeveloped, particularly for pedestrian crossing. But the initial concerns raised about, I think broadly speaking, the transit oriented development plan that we heard. One, of course, is the current train service on the Danbury branch line. Partly brought in the lack of electrification for the line right now. It's still diesel engines, and there's a kind of infrequency of service. And then also, what is the future of transit ridership in Connecticut, where there are a lot of folks that are working from home, not commuting down to Grand Central 5 days a week, twice a week. Even anecdotally, the woman who owns the coffee shop in the old train depot, they've been closed since COVID. And she talked about just the trajectory of ridership pre-COVID and sort of coming back. It's obviously not there. The numbers aren't there. And, we had this good conversation at that time, but broadly speaking, there is absolute truth that the ridership for Metro North is not back to the 2019 levels, which was 40 million trips a year. We know that's not going to happen in the same way. What we certainly see from projections of growth from the possibility of transit service is a different type of ridership. It will emerge, and is frankly already emerging in Connecticut. And Rudy mentioned this already. Rather than thinking about this as white collar commuters twice a day, Monday through Friday, the future of transit ridership in Connecticut is going to be much more fluid, much more not just peak and off peak, also going south, but also going north to Danbury. So we want to see the state really understanding that ridership is changing, but the way to encourage more ridership in the simplest sense is to build more homes and jobs within walking distance of that ridership. We also, of course, encourage bus ridership and multimodal transportation as the bike trail that's being projected by WestCog right now. So Branchville is a node of transportation already, of course. Historically, that's been the case. But there are really a lot of reasons to be optimistic that even though our current thinking of transit ridership is very much changing, this gives an opportunity to rethink it and to rethink who's using that train, when they're using it, what other forms of transportation they're using that's connected to transit. I don't know, Rudy, if you have any comment to make. I know this pedestrian bridge here, that's kind of part of the first wave of construction, if you want to talk about that.
Peter, yeah, one thing I didn't mention is the current projects that are underway for any of you who may make your way along the Route 7 portion of Branchville. The picture you're looking on the left of your screen is the intersection with 102. We're installing sidewalks. There have been no sidewalks ever in Branchville, and we'll be extending sidewalks from this location up to Florida Road, which is the entrance to Ancona's, and then south all the way to Wilton Line. And that would be on the west side or on the right side as you're heading toward Wilton. Along with the sidewalk, there'll be decorative lamps that will be added. A new intersection at 102, this location that you're looking at the left of your screen. A new bridge that will go into the train station that's called Depot Road, with a walking component, a sidewalk component to the bridge. That'll bring connectivity, pedestrian connectivity to this area. And then as you move a little further south toward Portland Avenue, at that intersection, there will be a new traffic light, a new bridge as well, a left turn lane, plus a through lane to help alleviate traffic congestion at the 102 intersection that backs up about a mile north up to Florida Road. Once that's completed, we will, as I said, do the Portland Bridge, and then Metro North will be widening and reconfiguring the crossing of the tracks at Portland Avenue. That will accommodate a truck's ability to make a left turn on the West Branchville Road. Right now, trucks cannot make that left. It's too narrow. And that also includes fire safety as well. Fire trucks, a ladder truck could not make that left turn. So we need to take many, many different factors into consideration. But what you're seeing happening now is the foundation, the beginning to make Branchville a pedestrian-friendly community. And then hopefully with the sewer allocation, we will begin to see some projects evolve. And I think once you get one project into the construction phase, that'll certainly invite the interest of others.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point, and it's fun to be in this particular circumstance. We've done walks previously up in Bethel on the same line where they've done the zoning changes already. The station had been built a little bit further. There's still some infrastructure that needs to come in as well, but the proof's in the pudding, as Rudy said, and seeing some construction just from the average person driving down Route 7 is going to pique interest, and the improvements that's already in place are really very good for the pedestrian safety on this standpoint. We, have more pictures, of course, that we typically put in the appendix here, but this is at least a good illustration that there's shovels in the ground on stuff. And that really does help solidify that after lots of years of talk from it, sounds like there's actually stuff happening here.
Yeah, the total investment will be about 8 million when complete.
And one of the concerns that particularly came up at both crossings at Route 7, of course, is the traffic on Route 7. Which even on a Saturday morning when this walk took place is pretty considerable. So making the pedestrian safety a priority is a really important piece of this puzzle. The connectivity to the train station and the eastern part of the neighborhood is going to be really improved by that. One of the questions that came up from a person on the walk was, is Route 7 going to have to be expanded to a 4-lane local surface road. And we had a conversation about this, Rudy, and if you want to just jump in quickly there, both the broader philosophical argument is improving land use around the train stations, and we'll build it more transit usage and actually alleviate traffic. But in the short term, it sounds like there are no plans to expand Route 7, which I think is the right decision. But I want to let you elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, we did several years ago. The state wanted to for the town to consider a roundabout at the intersection you're looking at again on your screen at Route 102 Branchville Road and Route 7. And one of the issues that a negative associated with a roundabout is that it does not stop the flow of traffic. In other words, it will be a continuing flow, which prohibits all of your curb cuts, your stores along Route 7, side streets. It makes it much more difficult. It's already a difficult situation. It'll only compound it in trying to pull out into Route 7. So the thought was to stick with what we're doing now, actual traffic lights. To expand and make it wider will be difficult. I would look at something like we just completed here on Main Street. We did not widen the road at all, but we have been able to put in various turn lanes that help increase the level of service, the efficiency, if you will, and improving our intersection with Prospect Street with new signalization, et cetera. I think this will become a perfect candidate for a similar project in the near future.
Yeah, and that's sometimes the tension, as many of us know, of particularly working with DOT. Sometimes their perception of what needs to happen in a plan might not be the best option, and sort of the local expertise on a plan like the Branchville plan is really where we want to emphasize what planning is being done, what local context is understood, and we certainly agree with that assessment as well. It should not in this area be about moving traffic. It should be moving pedestrian,
that's right,
business interests, and slowing down traffic, creating more opportunity for walkability is actually a much better way to increase business activity and interest in development down there.
We would rather have people choose to take the train.
We'll get there. Okay, so moving up, we crossed Route 7, started walking up 102, which goes into the main town center. This, I think, is, if I'm not mistaken, Rudy, where the bike trail would be coming through, or I don't remember exactly where that is. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that, that would be helpful to know.
So the Norwalk River Valley Trail is planned to cross this is the intersection of Playground, where the telephone pole is, and that little green street sign is Playground Road, which is where the group took a left. Just beyond here is where the Norwalk River Valley Trail would cross heading north through Ridgefield, Branchville, on into a section of Reading. We took a left at this intersection, but it will give access to the bike trail, walking trail, as I mentioned at the beginning, from Danbury to Norwalk.
Yeah, and certainly one of our standard recommendations for these walks is not just thinking pedestrian infrastructure, also bike infrastructure. So the kind of the medians right now are certainly wide enough for walking. It's not obviously as ideal as a dedicated pedestrian and dedicated bike lane, but certainly linking that trail to the Branchville area and making it easy to bike to the train station from a connectivity point is something to think about for Route 102 as well, because that's just an exciting project, and we really try to advocate for thinking about the Rails to Trails projects in Connecticut, not strictly as recreational, but also as potential commuter opportunities. And just selfishly, I live right across from the Farmington Canal Rails to Trails, and I can bike to meetings up and down on a north-south basis. And that connectivity for that trail, that right of way that's already there, obviously presents an opportunity for folks to make that trip. But even just taking it from your home down to the train station, linking up those assets are really a big piece of getting traffic off of the road. And it's really exciting. We did invite Westcog to the walk. They couldn't make it, but hopefully we can follow up a little bit more about what that trail looks like, but it's really cool that that's part of the mix of this project.
Yeah, Peter, just a sidebar on West Cog. Out of the 18 communities, 11 are able to entertain a TOD concept.
Yeah, it's, I think there was a question early in the walk on Saturday of why are we doing it in Ridgefield? And part of our response was we've been doing them across the state, Windsor, West Hartford, Bethel, certainly Danbury on the Danbury line. But there is just a significant opportunity because these train lines have been here for 200 years. And there are a lot of local plans happening, certainly in the West Cog catchment area. Some have already been executed, some are in the works. But thinking about that also in what other types of transportation can reasonably get some of those less than 5 mile trips off of the roads. And that's part of the piece of it too. Sir, that's my dog barking. All right, so moving on, as Rudy said, we took a left onto Playground Road, which is very much a sort of narrow, lightly trafficked road. A couple of the things that came up that I certainly want to hear more from Rudy, talking about this sort of septic capacity versus public sewer capacity. And you mentioned that the ball field was actually a good candidate for some community septic as a potential future, maybe not the full load, and that's why the Reading connection makes more sense. But that was something that was brought up. The other piece, as Waze and other kind of traffic apps have emerged, this little side street becomes a way to get around that big intersection at 102 and Route 7. So, as we think about the zoning changes that could take place around this area, what are the potential plans for pedestrian sidewalks or expansion of the Playground Road, and making sure it doesn't become kind of a backdoor traffic outlet for folks, particularly because there is a park there that kids are going to be playing on. But we do want to see multifamily development around this little area. So, curious to hear a little bit more about some of the septic study that you did on this particular site, but also what some of the land use changes could impact this road, Rudy.
Yeah, well, the ball field you see right on your left was the primary area that was looked at for future septic, which would accommodate approximately an additional 6,000 square feet of commercial building. Not quite enough to accommodate the plan or even the beginning of a plan. It was abandoned. We also looked at two other alternatives. One would be to put in a pump station that would pump the effluent up to the sewer plant in Ridgefield. That was probably the single most expensive alternative. And the second one would be to pump up Route 7 to a sewer plant located at Pond's Edge in Ridgefield. That would be close in cost to the first alternative, with the connection to the Georgetown plant being the most logical. Relative to the roads, as you can see, these are not wide roads, and they're not built to accommodate any kind of a traffic volume whatsoever. So we need to be cognizant of that when we look at the area as the walk continued. There are many small homes. They've been there for years. Again, this area really was a residential area for people who worked at the Wireman many years ago. They chose to live in this part of Branchville, Georgetown, and walk to work. So the homes are not large homes. They're relatively small. Some have been updated. So a couple have been torn down with newer, larger homes being built. But the character of the neighborhood is what is critical. And when you look at these homes, you have to understand what the history is behind them and why they were built, and the history of the area. So as we continue to progress through this plan, we need to keep that very important historical perspective foremost, and incorporate that into whatever happens in this area. But again, it's a nice little area, beautiful, and the roads are narrow and they should be kept that way.
Yeah, and that comes back to a question that we had when we stopped at the playground here about just the general sense of affordability and available housing stock. We gathered some of the information kind of at what the sales landscape and listings look like in Ridgefield right now, we know that there isn't a lot of availability for both deed restricted affordable housing and sort of naturally occurring affordable housing is a term that's batted around. But we also know, to Rudy, your point from earlier, change is happening anyway. Some of the older housing is being demolished and more expensive newer housing is being built. So without planning for more walkability and the kind of historic legacy of people walking to work in this neighborhood, that's already the character, and we want to see that expanded and certainly protected. It would be a missed opportunity to do this kind of plan with really expanding the road network here, as opposed to thinking about what kind of multifamily density could work that is in line with this, that isn't an added expense for expanding the road or anything like that. And the next phase here was kind of going down Park Lane, as you talked about, Rudy, as well. That bottom left picture, the far end of that is where the baseball field meets that area. So, in the sense that this is right across the street effectively from the train station, there's an older housing stock here. How can we help preserve some of that? How can we help expand that type of smaller, more naturally affordable housing, as well as building more multifamily housing, which we know economically makes more sense in this area. And just, one thing I'll mention, we talked about this on the walk, of course. From our perspective at Desegregate Connecticut, we are supporting a proposal called Work, Live, Ride, which is really trying to emphasize building more homes and jobs around our train and bus stations. Some of it got passed this session. Hopefully next session we'll get some more of it. But the kind of what we call the secret weapon of Work, Live, Ride is trying to figure out ways to build more what's known as missing middle housing. And, it's either in Connecticut, single family housing on large lot sizes, or we see larger multifamily developments, 200-300 units, 4 or 5 stories. There is a wide missing middle gap. It's duplexes, it's quads, it's village clusters. It's a lot more scale that people are used to in Connecticut. Most of our communities, including Parkville or Branchville, have that kind of housing stock already. So how can we kind of flex that muscle again in Connecticut? Part of the proposal was to make that type of housing below 10 units per development as of right. That alone is not going to make it economically viable. There's other things that we need to do, but we think that's a big piece of it. And I think that imagination vacuum freaks people out in Connecticut. They assume there really is either it's just single family, low density, or it's these really big, developments you might see in a bigger city. But there is a sweet spot here that we're not building in Connecticut that would make a perfect amount of sense in the Branchville area. So we just highlight the fact that from our perspective, part of what we're advocating for, even in Branchville, is this: can you set the landscape up to have a nice amount of missing middle house constructed that fits into that historic character, that walkability? But we're just economically not there yet. And there's a lot of other interventions that have to happen, but that's something that we are working on to hopefully, tip the scales in the favor of that kind of development. So you had already mentioned this, Rudy. I think we had one more slide. Okay, sorry. The other piece is the Portland crossing there. It wasn't clear to me if that was already funded. That's breaking ground soon, or that's kind of the next phase to still be funded. Oh, Rudy, can you hear me?
Please. Can you say that again, please? Sorry.
Oh, sure. Sorry. I don't know if I cut out. You mentioned this earlier, but the other crossing that we took as on the walk was back across Route 7 down Portland. And
Portland Avenue. Where your red circle is in that lower right picture. I believe that's the Portland Avenue intersection right there, where you can take a left. As we look south where we are now, there'll be a left turn lane into Portland and a right hand through lane, and there'll be a sidewalk all the way along the entire right side of that road down to the Wilton line and back up to where Tuscan Cup is, with a walking bridge that gets you over a little brook that comes down from the west and allows you to continue north on 7 for a couple of 100 yards. But this will have a traffic light. There'll be new signalization, as well as a crosswalk for people. So once again, creating that pedestrian connectivity is vitally important as a first step, allowing people to work, live, and play.
And that part of the project is funded, right? Because I remember you mentioning that the
Yes,
least
that's part of-
sidewalk part that's coming up like soon, right?
Yes, the current project, about 2.2 million, is the sidewalks and the intersection at Branchville. Part 2 will be the replacement of the Depot Road Bridge that we were looking at the beginning of this session. And then the final bridge will be here at Portland Avenue with a new intersection, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's, the expansion for truck crossings and fire expansion to make sure that's
Right.
accessible.
And that should be completed by 2025.
Yeah, that's a really, big piece of going back to the Branchville plan itself. This kind of eastern side of the river getting into Reading, that's where, the Georgetown Village is, and really bridging that gap, making that more walkable and laying some foundation to build more housing there is going to really expand that walkability and that connectivity between both communities.
Right.
Which is, pretty exciting. I should say that I believe, George, we did reach out to some folks in Reading. One of our takeaways from this walk is, continuing the conversation with both Wilton and certainly Reading about, their impact of this area as well, and trying to move some of those things, that collaboration between towns, move that along a little bit too. That's something that we feel like we can bring some value to. So we came back and wrapped up there. So certainly, as we've been discussing on this walk, the big public concerns that really came out qualitatively, and both in some of the feedback in the plan itself, safety for walking, that's really is being addressed in this phase 1 that's already construction started. Certainly the increase of traffic that's already there. One note that we mentioned on the walk, and this comes up all the time in our walks across Connecticut, is traffic has absolutely, gotten worse in just about every parts of the state. Connecticut has grown over the last 20 and 30 years. So the existing traffic is really a product of this more low density type sprawl, where if you have 2 incomes and 2 teenage kids, that's going to be 4 cars. 100% of those trips likely are going to be cars. So really, to reduce traffic, to slow down the increase of traffic and to further reduce it, you've got to find ways to reduce those short amounts of trips, bring people into walking distance of public transportation and other forms. So that is something that universally true in Connecticut. Certainly our experience in Route 7 Saturday morning was seeing that. But the solution to that long term, not an easy solution, but it is expanding transit service. And that's something we are advocating for at the state level, both the electrification of the Danbury line. They're taking some steps now to, create some better crossings, but a double track, that seems further away. Electrification, they just did a lot of expansion on the Waterbury branch, which we've highlighted in some other walks. We're trying to advocate for seeing this as a major source of transit growth, but traffic is not going to get better without that kind of infrastructure investment. Other impacts, of course, the sewer and water was brought up and discussed. We think at least there's a pretty smart solution to that. There's a lot of complications, obviously, that Rudy's navigating to get that, but the connection to the Georgetown plant seems like a really good opportunity for addressing some of those infrastructure concerns. Tied to that is, what is the implications from a tax perspective? And Rudy, you'd mentioned this, and I'll defer to you again, but growth means more tax revenue. So the sort of burden on the individual taxpayer in Ridgefield very much empirically will be lightened by having more of this type of development and growth. So it pays for itself in many ways, but that's something, Rudy, if you just want to touch on that, I think you really bring a good perspective on.
The tax revenue component of this, as Ridgefield moves through this century, we don't see a lot of, for example, large businesses moving into our community. We have Beringer Ingelheim in the north end is our major partner. But once you take a step down from BI, there's very little in terms of that medium size. So as we continue to move forward, we need to look for additional revenues from somewhere that do not carry a high cost with it. Now, one thing we did not talk about is the impact on schools, and there's unquestionably going to be an impact on schools, but in a multifamily high density development, for example, Casagma or Fox Hill, 2 condominium facilities or residents here in town, we don't see a tremendous number of children from those 2. So although we will have an impact on the schools, it'll be impacted at the Branchville school. We'll do our estimates on that, but I do believe that the net will be a positive to the town of Ridgefield in terms of additional tax revenues. And again, help provide a level of housing that's going to be needed, whether it's mandated out of Hartford, which many of us disagree with, but some people in Hartford feel this has to happen in order to be prepared. Whereas I think Ridgefield can be prepared on its own by pursuing projects like this and bellying up to the table and meeting our obligations when it comes to housing for the future.
Yeah, and Rudy, I just want to alert you in the appendix we put together, as I mentioned, some projections. This is from CT Data Collaborative out of New Haven. Doesn't have it down at the sort of town level, but these are some projections, and I've got them in 2 different ages. And really the takeaway here is the near-term projections, it's a decrease in school-aged children. And we see that really across the board, as I've mentioned. So we do hear that often, that the impact about the schools, good faith concern. Unfortunately, the problem is the opposite. We don't have enough school-aged children, and it's not just housing costs that are part of that, but that's certainly a piece of the puzzle. But from a capacity standpoint, we know that a lot of this new housing is for empty nesters, for young people cycling through the housing market that won't see that impact. The other thing I'll point out, which I think intuitively we all know, but particularly some of these higher age cohorts, that's a significant part of the population growth. We're going considerably older population, and those folks also, of course, want to downsize and remain in town. So we think from a school capacity standpoint, a lot of communities had that big bubble kind of in the 90s. So the capacity is there to take in some more folks, but we don't have the housing for either end of that spectrum that we really think is pretty important. And as I said, we'll pass along this presentation for folks.
Right. Thank you.
But so, and then the affordability you mentioned, there's a lot of controversy around the state mandate, the 830G program. We want to be more proactive about affordability as well. Realistically, if you build all levels of housing, that takes the pressure off at all different levels of income. But to some degree, relying on the private sector from inclusionary zoning or 830G is not as easy a solution as building more socially funded, affordable housing, taking that burden off the private sector. Towns can do that with some support. The state can obviously do that. There are smart things we can do there. The other side of it, as we've addressed, and I don't think is as part of the conversation as much, but trying to create more innovation and flexibility in the market rate side of things as well. We really want to encourage that missing middle component, whether it's rentership or ownership. The idea of that $200,000, 900 square foot starter home from a generation ago is no longer really feasible or desirable environmentally. So we have to think of new innovative ways to create ownership, to create rentership that's not just subsidizing. We have to think of different codes, different construction types, different materials. All of those types are part of this conversation as well. Work Live Ride, we think, is trying to innovate and create some competition and some ways for places to think about this solution locally. So we very much want to see both capital A, deed restricted affordability. There are means to do that. It's very expensive, but we're advocating for a lot of that. But we also do want to see lowercase affordability. And we think a lot of that comes from innovation at the private sector that restrictive zoning also prevents. So there's a lot of opportunity, particularly around our stations to think about those issues. And we are thinking about them very much at Desegregate Connecticut. But let's get to the fun stuff. I mean, people talked about this a lot of, we want to see more homes for young people and seniors, downsizing or breaking into community. We know that that 20-year-old renter in the Gen Y building that's being constructed, she or he is gonna love living in Ridgefield and maybe settle down, buy a condo, then filter into a single family home with kids. So that kind of inbound and outbound housing we want to see more of. This is a good opportunity here. Rudy mentioned this. It's unlikely there are going to be large business entities moving into the area, but there are jobs in Norwalks and New Yorks and Danbury's that more access to the transit corridor there will encourage more commuters and more local job services to support that. More foot traffic around these local businesses. Rudy mentioned this, every property owner in the area, it sounds like it felt pretty neglected in Ridgefield, but this is an opportunity to really see a lot of foot traffic. I really think of, and I forget the woman's name, Rudy, who runs the coffee shop in the train depot.
Yeah, Lolly Turner.
A bunch of us showed up looking to buy coffee that morning, and they were closed because of that. So, even just for her business, it's been there for a very long time. That type of foot traffic historically has been there. We want to see that back, and it's a lot of good steps are already happening for that. Obviously, we want to see more transit ridership. That is an advocacy opportunity for us, certainly pushing the state to think about it that way. But that's a big piece of the puzzle. We recognize the service is not there yet to have that high frequency, but we're advocating for that. And that's very much going to happen. We just want to see it happen sooner. And then, as we talked about as well, this is a growth opportunity for the town. The ROI on some of these zoning changes and infrastructure investments looks pretty good. And we've got a lot of examples in Connecticut already. But we know that Ridgefield can really grow considerably without increasing the public cost burdens for this. And that seems like a pretty exciting opportunity for the town as well. Okay, so just closing up here in the last couple of minutes, we've already gone through this, but just recapping what we think are some next steps here. Certainly, we want to highlight the existing projects that are being constructed right now. I think the walk really, for a lot of folks in town, are finally starting to see some stuff change there, which is a really great way to build up momentum for more. We certainly want to plan to support some of the developments that have been referenced that are at least in some of the design elements of this. So we already know the demand is there. There's already stuff in the works to be built there. So that's a pretty good argument for, encouraging some of these zoning changes and figuring out some of this infrastructure outreach. Next up for us too, of course, we want to continue helping Ridgefield outreach to Reading about the Georgetown plant, to advocate with WestCog for that bike trail and the links to the station itself. That's a really good opportunity for us and a lot of our coalition members in the transit space. And then, as I mentioned, we want to advocate for more discussion and planning around expanded transit service, possible electrification, and really make the case that if the state continues to invest in this infrastructure, it will pay off. Local communities want to grow, be responsible about it. So syncing everybody up, supporting these local plans with some state funding and some state infrastructure is a really, really good place for our focus that we look forward to working on the next couple of years. And then finally, Rudy, and I'll turn it back over to you. More public education, more outreach of what's in the works, what's coming, and why it's going to be beneficial. But I don't know if there are any upcoming meetings or discussions that you want to highlight for folks for some more local conversations coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Right now, we're hoping to get through the current projects that are going on. And the thought is to invite FHI, which is Fitzgerald Halliday Consultants that originally did this plan, to do an update. It was done and completed in 2017, so already it's 5 years old. And we need to keep it fresh with current information for people. And for anyone who would like a copy of the plan, I have plenty here in the office. The email here is selectman@ridgefieldct.gov, SELECTMAN @ridgefieldct.gov, and we'll be more than happy to supply you a copy of the plan. And you'll be notified as soon as we begin those public meetings and outreach through Fitzgerald and Halliday to move this project forward to reality.
Yeah, thank you for that. We'll certainly give updates about that as well as we continue to help out at the local level. But you're right, that came up as well, the plan from 2017. Obviously, the world's changed a bit, not dramatically so, but enough that it warrants revisiting and revising.
Well, as an example, pre-COVID, there was a little bit of talk about fiber and connectivity, technology. We went through COVID and came out the back end of it, realizing that fiber is more important than ever. And that would be a priority for this kind of project, to wire all of the entire community to have the most current of broadband available to each resident, to be able to telecommute, telelearn, do whatever they can do from home, thereby reducing vehicular traffic, et cetera, a little bit more.
Yeah, exciting stuff, daunting stuff, as we all know, but we really appreciate all the work, Rudy, that you're doing on all this. Just great stuff. And I want to say thank you quickly. I know we're kind of at the end here, but for some of the folks on here, did want to open up for questions if folks can hang out for a couple minutes. I don't know, Rudy, if you need to jump off, but we ran a little bit long, but I did want to open it up for folks on the call in case there's a question or two. You do have time for that.
I have a few minutes. Go ahead.
Okay. Christine?
Thank you so much. First of all, just thank you so much for this very comprehensive presentation. It was great. It was really very informative. I took lots of notes, and I'm just very interested in learning more about the plan. So I just want to thank you for all your work. Same to you, to Pete and to Rudy. Thank you. And I just want to apologize if there's pounding out of the blue in the background, because I'm like nervous they're going to start pounding and I'm not going to be able to. Anyway, I just wanted to make a comment about the plan that is from 2017. Mr. Harrison, you did make a note that, things have changed, but not so much. And I would just respectfully disagree with that. I think that a lot has changed since the pandemic, and I think that the best way, if we really want to do this the right way and plan it well, I think that we should start by doing another comprehensive study based on the way the world is now and the way Ridgefield is now. I don't think we should minimize the amount of impact there is on the trains and the commuting. And I know you talked about, it's important not to focus on the white collar commuters and focus more on people who are commuting. And I get that, if we can attract young people here who want to take the train to Danbury, I think that's wonderful. I really do. But I do think that there is a huge impact there on the number of people who are commuting, and just the train itself. I remember someone brought up at the walk, the frequency with which the train comes, which is very infrequent, from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m.
Yeah.
I think it would be best to start that way, like really do a new study. And I don't know what that would involve, Rudy. I just figured I'd throw that out there, but I do appreciate that you acknowledge it and said we need to add updated information to the study. I think that's really important. Would you mind if I asked, if somebody else has another question, that's fine. I just had one other question, I think, but.
Rudy, if you want to just jump in about the plan itself.
That'd be great.
Yeah, as far as the update, yes, 2017, a lot has changed, Christy. We're all well aware of that coming out of the pandemic, thank God. So we do need to do an update to this plan to take those changes into consideration. To your point, we used to oversell the Branchville train station parking lot by 30%. There was a demand that that's 142 parking places there, and we oversold it because people just wanted to be able to have that spot to be able to get on the train and go to New York whenever they wanted to. Today, we can't sell a parking permit, nothing. And we're looking at that, and that was the reference Peter made to Lolly Turner, who owns the Whistle Stop. She said it's starting to come back, but it's very slow. So she had to shut down her retail and go totally wholesale to keep in business. Those are the types of things we need to look at. How do we build the train service up believe me, we've been arguing this, gosh, I don't know, since the 90s, that the commuters who use Branchville are asking for more, a better level of service. And it doesn't have to be a new rail car, which apparently the state has just ordered 60 new rail cars to come in, but also the number of trains in the morning. And one of the things we talked about doing is, when you make this an intermodal transportation center, is to also offer buses that leave every 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to a certain part of Manhattan that are direct, and have that become a consistent way of getting into the city early in the morning when traffic is not reached its peak traffic hours. So those are the types of things that we have to get into this plan with a little more specificity.
Thank you. I made a note about something you talked about, the aging population. And I love, Rudy, thank you for acknowledging the effect on schools, because that was going to be one of my questions. Of course, we have to always be aware of how this will affect our schools, and we want to make sure we support our kids, because, to be honest, some of the nuanced effects on our children that this pandemic has had, we may feel for years to come. And we want to make sure that the Ridgefield Public Schools remains top-notch and supportive of our kids, especially class size. We want our class size to remain, the way it is, and I know it's public school, but we work really hard to keep our class size small, and our student teacher ratio, as small as possible. So I appreciate your commenting on that. And, you talked about the aging population, and I think that's great. Would we be able to consider something like a senior housing, like a 55 and above? I think that would be great to help.
Yes, absolutely. That would be part of it. This will be a truly mixed residential community, from the Gen Y, Gen Z to whatever they call my generation. I don't know what the hell it is, but where you would be invited to live there. And I think the young and the old do really mix well. And there's a third person that evolves from that relationship, and amount of respect I think we've lost in society. We need to get it back, and this type of development would help foster that.
I completely agree. I really, really do. And I think that young people help to keep the aging population young also at heart, you know what I mean? But I think that keeping in mind that, like, maybe even a 55 plus type situation for the aging population, because I know that's always a comment that comes up, that we want to be able to keep our aging population here if they want to downsize,
Right.
And just, lastly, I'll just say, I do think that building starter homes is also still very much desirable. I know there was a mention about it not being environmentally desirable. But, people want their starter homes as well. And I think we need to make sure that we, as a community, continue to support the single family zoning that moved us all here. So that's something I just wanted to stress as well, and the open space, but I know you're talking about Branchville, and I appreciate that. Branchville needs some updating and work. So I appreciate it. And thank you for letting me ask my comments and stuff. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. And just to clarify my comment about the starter home, it's not in opposition to the idea of a sort of a starter home or closer home, as we're starting to call it, for downsizing seniors. The idea that I was talking about as outdated is this subdivision greenfield development by historical standards was very cheap because land was cheap, construction materials were cheap. That kind of economic model is frankly no longer viable. There aren't that type of land available. We do have POCDs where we don't want to see forests and farm fields put up by subdivision. So we've kind of taken that option off the table, both economically and frankly environmentally. Again, more car sprawl is not good. The next question we have to figure out, which is what we're working on, is what is the next generation of a starter home look like? It's
Okay.
multifamily, it's townhomes, it's village clusters. There are some models around that we can point to, but we just imagination wise need to say that tier of ownership for that younger folk. I'm included. I'm a renter right now. That
Okay.
starter home doesn't exist for me in the sort of attainable way, but we've got to think of new types of construction and new types of models. So Branchville does have that opportunity. It's smaller townhomes, it's quadplexes, those kinds of things. So it's still, how do we bridge that entry point to ownership at either end of the market or either end of the life cycle? We can't think about it like we're just going to have some magical greenfield cheap development someplace else. We can't think about it that way.
Okay. So in addition to, I see what you're saying. So like moving up to that single family home, like, okay. And also offering different options. And I think that's what I'm hearing. And I do appreciate the conversation about, multifamily home that fit in with the charm versus a big apartment building, because this is not a city. And I don't think that anyone who moved here wants it to turn into something like that. So, but I will step back and allow someone else to speak. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Yvonne, if you want to close us out here, I know we got to get moving on here, but.
Sure, I'll be quick. Great plan. I'm sorry I missed the walk a couple of weeks ago. Rudy, this has been really interesting. So thank you so much for sharing. This is really great thinking. When we talk about developments, I always, as a former first selectman and as a housing commissioner, would always think about our developments should reflect our neighborhoods. And as I sit here, in my house in my neighborhood in Darien, and I think about the folks who live here. So we have older folks. I'm part of the older folks, Rudy, in my neighborhood. We also have folks with newborns, and we have people who have physical disabilities, and we have children who are autistic in our neighborhood. So when I think about developments, that's what our development should look like, right? Not just one age group, not just one group of folks with certain capabilities. So it's great to hear about your holistic approach and your big vision. And just thanks so much, Pete, for talking a little bit about that starter homes piece, because it is a different world from when my parents, who are in their 90s, first bought a home, right? That was a 2-family home. That was an investment. And I think, Rudy, this might be ringing true for you. And some of our friends may have had that opportunity. So I think our generation and the generations preceding us, to your point that you've made, we've had different kinds of opportunities, and presenting and having housing such as missing middle housing, the duplexes, the triplexes, the fourplexes, really present those starter home opportunities in different ways. And then I'll just end on this. We have our housing authority property here in Darien has 105 units on 10 acres. And that sounds like a lot, but the way this has been built, and I think both Pete and Rudy are familiar with this, has the appearance of single family cluster homes when they're really duplexes and fourplexes, but the appearance would fit within our single family neighborhoods, so that it does have an appearance. So housing these days in the 21st century is not the old early or mid 20th century big block brick housing that we've seen. So there's just so many different design options that really can maintain those building characteristics of our communities here in Fairfield County. So this was really terrific, and thank you, Rudy, and thanks, Pete, for taking the time to do this today.
Well, yeah, thank you, Yvonne, for your comments, and you've got a pretty well-informed perspective given your career. So thank you for participating, and sorry you couldn't make the walk too. So yeah, on that note, I do want to wrap it up since we're over a little bit, but just, on behalf of Desegregate Connecticut, I also want to thank Rudy for, helping organize this walk, and for folks that participated in the walk, participated in the workshop, and are participating in the conversation going on. it's not about agreeing on 100% of things 100% of the time, but it is figuring out the folks in good faith that want to solve these problems together. And, between all of us are going to be some good solutions out there to do so. So we really appreciate the heavy lifting, Rudy, that you're doing. Appreciate the folks coming out that have good faith concerns and good faith ideas. This is how we make progress, and really looking forward to seeing this plan get developed. We always talk about this at the end of someday we're going to do a follow-up walk at Branchville, and hopefully some really cool stuff will be there, and a different type of voice that's living there now that couldn't previously will be part of this. So we look forward to that. But in the meantime, good luck with a couple of the public meetings. We'll certainly let folks know about that in our network. So otherwise, thanks so much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day and weekend.